and welcome to Kitchen Chemistry with your host and chef extraordinaire, Professor Tastydeesh. Today we will be making one of the easier kitchen chemistry experiments, one that does not require the cooking or the baking. You may ask, how is this possible, Professor Tastydeesh, that we do not have the cooking or the baking when we are doing the kitchen chemistry? Well, of course, we are doing just the opposite. We'll be doing the freezing. And what will it that will take the freezing, you ask? Well, it is none other than the birthday favorite, the ice cream cake. Now first we will look at the equipment we will need for today's experiment. It is a simple procedure, although we do not need anything too typical. First, and most importantly, we need a spring-form cake pan. Next, for displacing and moving the equipment and chemicals, we need a spatula. You could also use a big spoon. We will need something large for the crushing. That will be explained later. And also we need a blender or food processor, whichever you have. The chemicals for today's experiment we see here, or I should say the ingredients for today's kitchen chemistry. We have the ice cream sandwiches, Oreo cookies, et faites attention, I said cookies, not cookie crumbs. We also have ice cream, 3 different kinds. I have chosen café, date by chocolat, and raspberry sorbet. You also will need some Cool Whip and a little bit of milk, which is not exactly an ingredient, it is a catalyst. Now the first step is to take 2 moles of ice cream sandwiches, which is about 12 ice cream sandwiches. You take them and you cut them into quarters like this. You have to make sure that they are the same height, half and half again. Then you take the ice cream sandwiches. They do melt very fast, so be careful. You stand them up on the outside of the spring-form pan, like so. Taking them being the same height so that they make the same edge around the outside. Take note that sometimes they will break in half, but you can still stand them up. Voila! After placing all of the ice cream sandwich quarters around the outside of the cake, it should look like this. For the next step, we must make the bottom of the cake. You take 4 moles of Oreo cookies. Remember, 1 mole is 5 cookies, so total of 20 cookies. And crush the cookies as best as you can. If you have the food processor, you can put them right in there with a splash of milk. It helps to crush up and tastify the cookies. However, if you're using a blender, it does not work so good. So it is better to do the crushing first. Take your heavy object and crush. You take your crushed cookies and you pour them into the blender. As I said, you are looking for a paste, not for just the cookie crumbs. This is why it is important to be using the cookies and not the Oreo cookie crumbs, because the delicious white filling of the Oreo cookies helps to make the paste. We get all the cookies crushed into the blender, add a little bit of milk. Like I said, it is the catalyst, not the proper ingredient, and blend as best as you can. As you can see, we now have the ooey gooey paste which came out of the blender. Very tasty, n'est-ce pas? You take the ooey gooey paste and you place it on the bottom of the pan. You spread it around and make sure that there are no holes. That way, when you add the ice cream later, it will not leak out. So you take your spatula, you spread the ooey gooey paste around, and it makes a nice solid bottom for the cake. Now that you are finished with the ooey gooey layer, it should begin to look like this. Next, you select an ice cream for your first layer. I have chosen the date by chocolate. You add 1 mole of ice cream. In this case, 1 mole is about half a liter, 500 milliliters of ice cream. You slowly add the ice cream into the cake. You add it slowly because you do not want it to disturb the other layers. You do not want a chunky layer. You want a good, nice, smooth layer. Depending on the size of your pan, you may not need all the ice cream. As you note here, I have not used exactly the 500 milliliters, but I do want to leave some room for the other layers. We will now leave this layer because it will need time to freeze before we add the second layer.
Perhaps while you wait for the freezing to happen, you could enjoy a little game of tennis. Or perhaps even a little existentialism.
As you can see, we now have the first layer. It is still a little soft, so we must be careful when we add the second layer. What we have here is the sorbet. It is melted, so we need to be careful again when adding it. Perhaps what you could do is to pour it over the spatula to give it a more even distribution. This way we make sure that it does not mix in so much with the chocolate and it adds very lightly into a layer as we are expecting. There may still be a little bit of mixing as the raspberry sorbet may go in down between the chocolate layer. One other thing you can do is instead of letting the sorbet melt, you can add it as it is frozen. Bon, we now have our two layers of the ice cream cake. As we see, the chocolate and raspberry has mixed a little bit, but that should be okay. Now we add the third and final layer, the coffee layer. Again, adding very slowly. Perhaps it is important to make sure that the ice cream does not melt too much, because when it melts too much, it is possible that it will mix. However, this time we give a little more time for it to freeze, and it will pour and lay on top much better. Now for the third layer, again, we must give it a little time to freeze before we do the final steps.
Perhaps at this point you could go and finish that tennis match from earlier. As you can see here, I am a natural champion.
Et voilà, excellent mes élèves. Now we are at what they call the finishing touches. You will take the Cool Whip and you add the Cool Whip into 1 mole blobs. 1 tablespoon is 1 mole, and you put them onto the cake however you like. It gives it this certain personal flair, that certain je ne sais quoi. You add whichever blobs wherever you like. Then you take 1 mole of the Oreo cookie. You place a few into the bag for adding the crushing again. Also, you take the other Oreo cookies, you break them in half or in quarters again, however you like. And you use those as decorations as well to give it a nice, fancy little touch. Perhaps we put 2 in the middle. Perfect! Then, as I said, you can take the crumbs and do whatever you like. Perhaps a little sprinkle of Oreo cookies on top. Et voila! We have the ice cream cake, the finished product, without the cooking or the baking, a delicious dessert. This cake makes about 8 moles of servings, where 1 serving is 1 slice is 1 mole. Also, as we see, as with any science experiment, we do not always have things go out, how do you say, as you planned. We have some of the raspberries that mixed with the chocolate. We only had the 2 layers where we wanted the 3 layers. But sometimes that is science. Thank you for joining us. Be with us next week when my guest will be the Swedish chef and we will cook a turkey lurkey. Au revoir et merci.